Hello, it's me, Christine. Welcome to my little crime corner. Who here lives in what they consider a walkable neighborhood? I feel like most of us used to, no matter where we lived, it didn't matter, it was walkable. I'm sure many places are still walkable, but I wouldn't know. I'm an inside cat. In the early morning hours of July 26th, 1974, in Provincetown, Massachusetts, a young girl was walking around her neighborhood and something caught her attention. In the distance, she could hear a dog frantically barking. She made her way up the road, venturing several yards off the main road into the sand dunes, getting closer to the sound. Then she stopped suddenly in her tracks. She discovered what appeared to be human remains. She was able to compose herself, and then she ran back to find help. Police were then called to the scene. Once there, they found the victim partially covered, lying face down on a blanket. They determined that the victim was a young to middle-aged woman who had long reddish auburn hair that was pulled up in a ponytail. Upon initial inspection, there did not appear to be any obvious signs of a struggle around the scene, and the police thought that the woman might have known her killer, or might have had her guard down, or even that she might have been sleeping. She had a bandana and a pair of jeans balled up under her head that police theorized might have been used as a makeshift pillow, hence the theory that she might have been asleep at the time of her death. However, this theory quickly dissipated as police removed the blanket and bits of debris and discovered that this woman was nearly decapitated. She was also missing both of her hands, one of them all the way up to her elbow. There was not much else around the scene other than two sets of footprints leading to the young woman and tire tracks nearly 50 yards away, leading seemingly in the opposite direction. The perimeter in the sand around the scene itself was not disturbed, which led investigators to believe that she was not killed at this location. Rather, she was moved here after the fact. Aside from the bandana and the jeans found here, no other personal belongings were found. She was then transported to the county coroner, and an autopsy was performed. The findings of the autopsy revealed that the victim was somewhere between 5'6" and 5'8", and weighed around 145 pounds. Something interesting that the medical examiner had found was that she had some expensive and extensive dental work, in addition to having several teeth missing. It was difficult to pinpoint her age, with some evidence suggesting that she might have been as young as 20 or as old as 50. Ultimately, her cause of death was determined to be strangulation based on the abrasions on her neck, as well as trauma from a severe blow to the head. There was evidence she continued to have been assaulted post-mortem. Based on the condition she was found in, as well as the semi-concealed location, it was possible that she had been deceased for up to 2 weeks before her discovery. Based on how many teeth were forcibly removed, as well as the purposeful removal of her hands, it was clear that the killer was going to great lengths to conceal this woman's identity in order to get away with the murder. A burial was conducted for her in October that year, and after that, the case went cold. There were no leads after the autopsy, and the police were at a standstill. Police began looking over thousands upon thousands of missing persons cases, all in the nearby surrounding area and up to 100 miles away. Nothing of use turned up. It wasn't until 1979, 5 years after she was found, that her first facial reconstruction was created, as her skull was not buried with her remains. A few months later, in 1980, her remains were exhumed and further examined, although no new clues had yielded at this time. Shortly after, she was returned to her resting place. As the facial reconstruction image was released by police to the media, a woman had contacted them saying that this resembled her sister, who had gone missing in Boston in 1974. After looking into it, it was determined to not have been her. In March of 2000, her body was once again exhumed, this time for DNA testing. In May 2010, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children used her skull and created another reconstruction. But let's back up a bit. In 1981, investigators came across a tip about a woman who resembled this woman, based on the facial reconstruction, who also had auburn reddish hair, was seen at one point with mobster Whitey Bulger sometime around when this woman had died. This lead did not pan out any further, as there was nothing linking him to this particular death, other than her perceived appearance and the fact that Whitey Bulger had been known to remove his victim's teeth. This lead made no sense. Around this same time, Massachusetts serial killer Tony Costa had been considered a suspect. However, very shortly after a quick search, investigators had discovered that he had died on May 12th, 1974, and as you remember, this woman was found in July of that same year. In 1987, a woman in Canada had come forward and told police that her friend had confessed to her that she witnessed her father strangling a woman in 1972 while they were living in Massachusetts. Police were eager to speak with this woman and tried to locate her, but unfortunately were unsuccessful. An earlier lead that was pursued involved Rory Jean Kissinger, who had been imprisoned for 2 assaults, had escaped from jail in 1973. Rory would have been 25 at the time of the victim's murder, and she would have been close in height and build. Investigators were able to obtain a DNA sample from Rory's mother, and were then able to eliminate her as the possible victim. Several other missing women from Massachusetts were also ruled out at this time, and the case stalled once again. One of the more wild theories about this woman's identity and disappearance was that she was an extra in the first Jaws movie. The movie was filmed in May of 1974, in the vicinity of where this woman was found, just about 100 miles away in Martha's Vineyard, and lots of people in and around the surrounding area were involved with the production. So it really would not have been that much of a stretch. It was actually Stephen King's son, Joe Hill, who had gone to police with this theory after reading a book called The Skeleton Crew: Amateur Sleuths Are Solving America's Coldest Cases, several weeks before. While watching Jaws, Joe noticed a woman in the 4th of July beach scene that he was convinced was the murder victim, as she was wearing jeans and a blue bandana on her head, the very same items that were found with the victim. This lead really went nowhere, as things are pretty tight and well documented on film sets, and all crew and talent would have been easily accounted for. Even though it was the 70s, it wasn't necessarily easy to slide in on a set and appear on camera. Also, if you think about one trying to keep a low profile, why would you risk it? Being around several hundred people and being captured on film? I don't think so. This speculation could have come from someone just wanting the thrill of solving the case, or just being desperate to be involved. This theory was later described as being far-fetched and dismissed as nothing more than wild speculation. Police got a break in the case in 2000 when a known murderer named Hayden Clark had actually confessed to this woman's murder, and he led police to the spot where he claimed he had buried two of his victims 20 years prior. He claimed that between 1970 and 1990, he had murdered many others across several states. After his confession to police, he stated, "I could not have told police what her name was. I wasn't going to tell them. This murder is still unsolved, and what police are looking for is in my grandfather's garden." Later, in 2004, Hayden Clark had sent a letter to a friend in which he stated he had killed a woman in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and had sent two drawings. One was of a woman who was laying on her stomach, missing her hands, and the other was a drawing of a map indicating where the body was found. Of course, being that this letter was sent decades after this woman's discovery, and her murder had been pretty well documented in the media over the years, this wasn't the bombshell it potentially could have been, given that this was not unknown information at the time. This was ultimately deemed to be a false confession, with authorities disclosing that Hayden Clark had suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and was known to falsely confess to crimes. It wasn't until 2022 that investigators sent the skeletal remains to a forensic genetic genealogy company called Orthram, who specializes in looking into and solving older cold cases or unsolved cases using genealogical methods to track down culprits and identify victims, and they were able to generate a DNA profile and identify distant relatives. Because of this, the victim's identity was ultimately discovered. Up until now, she was known as the Lady of the Dunes, but on October 31st, 2022, the Boston FBI had revealed this woman's identity as being Ruth Marie Terry. At the time, they made no mention of any suspects. Ruth Marie Terry was born in Whitwell, Tennessee, to Johnny and Ava Terry on September 8th, 1936. Ruth had lost her mother at an early age and was raised by her father. Ruth was briefly married in 1957, and upon leaving that marriage, she left her hometown to move to Livonia, Michigan, to work at an automotive plant. In 1958, Ruth gave birth to a son whom she named Richard, but because of her financial difficulties, she found herself unable to care for him. A man at the automotive plant named Richard Hanchett ended up adopting Richard, and he helped Ruth pay off her expenses. After Richard's adoption was finalized, Ruth then moved to California. Ruth had no contact with Richard for many years and had attempted to reach out to him in 1972. However, her attempts were unsuccessful. Richard had unfortunately fallen into a coma for 18 days due to a drug overdose. As far as I was able to tell, Richard was okay after the ordeal, but he was not able to make contact with Ruth. A few days after the Boston FBI's announcement on November 2nd, police announced that they were seeking any information on Ruth's husband, a man named Guy Moldovan. Police were really interested in any information they could get on Guy, since he had passed away in 2002. They found out that Guy was orphaned at a young age, and he was eventually adopted. Guy was living in New York and began attending the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1942. He had tried to enlist in the Army during World War II, but ended up being disqualified from service due to a mastoid infection. Guy had quite the string of jobs and relationships. In May of 1946, Guy met and married a woman named Joellen May Loop when he was working as a professor in Bellevue, Pennsylvania. The couple moved around a lot and lived in several states, including New York, California, and Washington. While in Washington, Guy worked as a DJ at a radio station. Guy and Joellen ended up divorcing on July 16, 1956. In September of 1958, Guy was living in Idaho and met and married a woman named Manzanita Ryan. Manzanita, or Manzi to her friends, had an 18-year-old daughter from a previous relationship named Dolores. Both Manzi and Dolores had mysteriously disappeared on April 1st, 1960. At the time, Guy had been the prime suspect in both women's disappearance. However, he had never been formally charged and ended up fleeing to Seattle, Washington. While in Seattle, the FBI found and arrested him, and he was charged with unlawful flight to avoid giving testimony into their disappearance. Just a few months later, in King County, Washington, on July 29th of that same year, Guy met and married a woman named Evelyn Marie Emerson. They split up, but ended up getting married again on August 10th, 1973, in Los Angeles. It was sometime during that brief few-month period between Manzi and Dolores going missing and marrying Evelyn that Guy faced grand larceny charges for swindling over $10,000 from Evelyn's family. Guy was convicted of larceny charges and was given a sentence of 15 years in prison. However, that sentence was later suspended, provided that Guy repay Evelyn's family. It seems that the money was never repaid, and Guy fled the state once again to avoid any consequences. In addition to all of this, it was later revealed that Guy was the prime suspect in the 1950 murder of a truck driver named Henry Lawrence Baird, and the suspect in the disappearance of a waitress named Barbara Jo Kelly. The last Henry and Barbara Jo were seen together was when the couple was out on a date in Humboldt County, California. Henry was discovered the following morning on a beach near Table Bluff. He was found face down in the sand, wearing only his socks and shoes. His clothes were found folded neatly on top of Barbara's clothes, which had also been folded neatly. Barbara's shoes were missing, along with Barbara herself. Henry was determined to have died from a single gunshot wound to the head. Barbara had not been heard from since, and it was suspected that whoever had killed Henry had kidnapped her. That's so insane, but we have to get back to Ruth. Ruth and Guy got married on February 16th, 1974, in Reno, Nevada. At the time, Guy was working as an antiques dealer. The couple took a trip back to Ruth's hometown of Whitwell to visit her family. Right off the bat, Ruth's family did not seem like the biggest fans of Guy, with Ruth's niece Brittany later saying that her aunt wasn't acting like herself when she was around Guy, and he was acting very controlling and possessive. The couple then went to visit Ruth's half-brother Kenneth and his wife Carol, who at the time were living in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Kenneth later recalled how Ruth and Guy were talking about the traveling they were planning to do, specifically that they were planning to visit Massachusetts to look for antiques. In late summer of 1974, Guy had returned to Tennessee without Ruth, and told her family that she had gone missing from their home in California. Ruth's sister-in-law Jan recalled that Guy had ended up staying with them for a short while, and he repeatedly said he didn't know where she was. This was very distressing to Ruth's family, and her brother James had decided to travel to California himself and hire a private investigator to find her. The PI had told James that all of Ruth's belongings had been sold and that she seemingly left California on her own free will after becoming involved in a religious cult. Ruth's family believed that this didn't seem like something that she would do, and she certainly would have called them first. They just couldn't believe this. Her sister-in-law Carol had thought that Ruth might be in witness protection and chalked that up as to why she had never contacted the family again. It should be noted that there is no evidence of this, but if she was in witness protection, there likely wouldn't be. But there was no reason or evidence that Ruth would have been in witness protection. Like, there really was no explanation for this. Not seeming at all concerned about her disappearance or wondering about her whereabouts, Guy had moved on, and sometime in 1976, Guy had moved to Chualar, California, which is a small town near Salinas, with his wife Phyllis. According to information found from a newspaper article written about him in 1985, he had worked and since retired as an executive vice president of a silver store on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. It was written that he had volunteered to host a 3-hour weekly call-in radio show on the local station KAZU. He also worked at one point in a tobacco shop. He died in 2002, and according to his obituary, he died at home from an unspecified, lengthy illness. On August 28, 2023, Guy was officially named as Ruth's killer. Since he had long been deceased, there was no trial and no justice. I do want to mention that in 2014, one of the investigators that was working on the case had raised funds for a new casket since the original one had deteriorated so much, which I thought was just a very kind thing to do. I feel so much pain for Ruth's family, and it hurts having so many unanswered questions. Her life was so tragically taken, and her killer was never brought to justice. Just so heartbreaking. The genetic genealogy was really the hero in this case. The only semblance of a resolution is that she was identified and returned to her resting place. Let me know what you think about this tragic case. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Oh my goodness. No, Stella, there's a candle.